Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator, and from our living Savior, Jesus, the Christ. Amen. Please be seated. Ever since Bible stories have been known, artists, musical and visual artists have made the Bible stories come alive. Our Lutheran Book of Worship, the Lutheran hymnal, that cranberry book in your pew rack, does an effort to make some of this available, this art available at our fingertips, even this morning. And so I'm going to invite you to turn in your ELW, in that cranberry book, to page 89, the smaller numbers at the bottom of the page, at the front part of the hymnal, page 89. And as you're finding that page, the one with the picture on it, it's placed there as the frontispiece of all the settings, the 10 settings for Holy Communion that we have in our worship book. As the frontispiece here, it's saying to us that we, as we participate in Holy Communion, we're joining these disciples at Emmaus. This art piece that's in our ELW is a piece by the contemporary Chinese artist He Qi. And how delightful it is to discover that the version it's a similar version, not exactly the same, but it's similar to the painting that has been hanging where? Where have you seen this painting, some of you? Anybody know? In the parish house over our fireplace. How many of you, now fess up, how many of you knew that this was the Luke 24 story of the Road to Emmaus Supper? All right. Anybody else? Were you aware of that? Some of you were? That this is the story before us today, and that's what we've been gathering around, President of our church council. When we sit there, we sit at the foot of what? At our church council meetings. This painting. It's right behind there on top of the fireplace as we're having our meetings together. When we have our lunches together, we're gathered around this table, this meal. And as our good Sunday school teacher Leah said this morning, you notice it's open in the beginning, in the front of it. There's room for all of us to gather around this table. Jesus reveals himself in the midst of our fellowship time, in the midst of our work. Now take a look at your bulletin cover. And we worked hard, the people in the office, John and Sarah, worked hard making sure we could get this printed. And you know, it's ancient, so it's okay to print it. This painting that's on here by Caravaggio was painted actually in 1601, when Caravaggio was 26 years old. Get that. Do we have anybody here who's around 26? There's got to be somebody. Oh, yeah, Bob Richards, right. But some of you other ones held your hand up, you know, around 26-year-olds. Look at them. What is a 26-year-old kind of? Anybody actually 26? Who? Oh, all right, stand up, wave at us. That's what a 26-year-old looks like. Oh, we have one here. Are you 26? Stand up. She's 26 too. All right. No pressure or anything, but this is what Caravaggio painted when he was 26 years old. A few years ago, my husband and I had the opportunity to visit the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Maybe some of you have been there as well. Have you been there? All right, you've been there too. Well, in this museum, the paintings we were looking at were not Van Gogh paintings, but there was a temporary exhibit going on showing comparisons of artists who painted the same topic and to show how differently they would paint this same topic. And so one of the comparisons in the Van Gogh Museum that year when we were there was comparing the one you have on your bulletin cover with Rembrandt's version of the supper at Emmaus. And I do have a copy of it in our parish hall in a book, so you can look at that Rembrandt. But what stood out to me in this time of being there was how they advertised the exhibit. What they did is, look again at your bulletin cover. Do you see a part of that painting somewhere in our sanctuary here? See this? Can you find that in the painting? You know whose hand that is supposed to be? Christ, the hand of Jesus. As I brought this in, a couple people were saying, oh, that looks like so-and-so's hand. I'm going to show it to him. You know, and whose hand it might be, you could think about, well, whose hand does that look like? But for Caravaggio, that's the hand of Jesus. And they made posters of it that you could buy and then spend a lot more money framing, as we did when we got home. But what was significant, even more so to me, was the way they advertised it is they blew this hand up and they put it on the outside of the Van Gogh Museum, this big blank, it must have been 25 feet high at least, of this hand up high on the side of the Van Gogh Museum. And what got me wondering, I wonder how many of all these, thousands of people roaming around Amsterdam, either whether they live there or they're visitors, how many of them know that that's the hand of Jesus up there? They're probably thinking, oh, that looks like so-and-so's hand. The hand of Jesus hovering over all of these people roaming around Amsterdam. Well, this supper part of this stirring story is the third part of a four-part story. The fourth part, all parts are important in this story. The fourth part is so important because the fourth part, as was stated brilliantly in our Sunday school class this morning, the last line, the disciples, they run back to Jerusalem in that very hour and announce that what has taken place on the road. So the disciples become the tellers of the good news. That's how the story ends. But the story begins with, and lots of paintings are made of it as well, with titling it The Road to Emmaus. And you've seen probably paintings of the road to Emmaus with the two walking along with Jesus. There's lots of those paintings as well. And they're so sad as they're walking. They're just crushed. Their hopes are dashed. They had hoped so much for what Jesus was bringing into the world. And that's what they're talking about when Jesus joins them as they're walking along the road. And he joins them, and this is almost a funny part. I mean, what has Jesus just gone through? And they're talking along, and he says, what things? Like he was oblivious to all that just had happened to him. But he does this for a reason. He comes and joins them, and he lets them talk. He lets them grieve. He lets them get in touch with their sorrow and their struggle and what's really going on for them in the world. Only after he does that does he open the scriptures. Only after he listens. Yesterday, April 9th, was the commemoration day for Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor martyred for his participation in a conspiracy against Hitler. April 9th is his death day. In Bonhoeffer's celebrated book, one of the top 5 books in my life, I've read it at least 5 times, is his celebrated book, Life Together. And perhaps we could do something with this amazing book if you haven't had a chance to read it. But he says in here, he has a little section on listening. And he says, the first service we owe to others in the fellowship consists in listening to them. It is God's love for us that God not only gives us the word but also lends us God's ear. It is God's work we do for our brothers and sisters when we learn to listen. Many people, Bonhoeffer writes, are looking for an ear that will listen. Jesus does this. Jesus listens. Only after listening and supporting them in their grief does Jesus begin to open the scriptures. And then they arrive home in Emmaus. It's evening. The day is almost over. And there's another odd part here, because the text says that Jesus appears to be going on. But they urge him strongly to stay. They invite him in. And have they recognized him yet? No, they still don't know who he is. He's a stranger, but they recognize him. And this is typical of first century Palestinian hospitality. They would welcome even the stranger in. I mean, who would know what could happen to him if he kept walking along in the dark out there on those lonely roads? So these two, without a clue as to who this is, this stranger, as this text says, is, they don't hesitate to invite him. The text says it strongly, urged him strongly. They want to make sure that we hear the urging that he would stay. It's part of their culture of hospitality. They know it's a life or death matter. Cultures of hospitality are under scrutiny these days around our world. Rarely does it feel very safe to bring in strangers, especially into our homes. But on a global level, the world, and this is, global, the world is being challenged. Countries and politicians are in the news for their stance on how it is that we might welcome strangers, or whether or not we will. With refugees coming from South and Central America and Bosnia and Syria and Iran and Palestine and Nigeria and wherever, the world is watching. How are we welcoming strangers? How well does the church welcome? Might we be entertaining angels unawares? And Jesus accepts their invitation. He doesn't do what the Scandinavian kind of thing that my Swedish mother learned to do. Oh, no, I'm fine. Thank you, but I'll be all right. I don't want to impose. Did any of you have that put on you? It's okay. But Jesus says yes. He accepts the invitation, and he makes himself right at home. He even becomes the host at the table at which he is also guest. And at supper, he takes the bread and he breaks it. And finally, they recognize him. And no sooner have they recognized him, and he vanishes out of the sight. That's what I like about that Caravaggio painting. In the painter's eyes, he caught that at the moment of what? Just the recognition of Jesus, but he's still there in the painting, right? He hasn't vanished out of their sight. I wish Caravaggio was, still here, or someone else could do this. Paint the painting at the second right after he's invisible. What is the look on these guys' faces then? John, you could do that. But what touches me most deeply in this is that the bread that he takes is the humble bread that his hosts have provided. Jesus doesn't bring something better from the outside, but rather takes what they have offered. And in the midst of that, their eyes are opened. It's our own ordinary contributions that are the circumstances in which Christ comes to be made known. At our dinner tables, in our workplaces, at our council meetings, in our homes, at our work, at our choir rehearsals, in the midst of what we do out in the world, in the midst of our efforts, our contributions, even if you think you're only contributing something ever so small, it is your contributions in the midst of that Christ comes to be made known. And especially in the mystery of the gift of being able to gather together as community and being Christ's body together. In the mystery of this moment, Christ says, yes, I am made known. Taking what we offer. So we've come full circle with this story and back at the supper. And the liturgy sums it up. Reveal yourself to us, O Lord, in the breaking of bread, as once you revealed yourself to the disciples. Reveal yourself, O Lord. We are doing the asking. We are inviting. We are urging Christ to do this revealing also among us. Susan Paulo-Cherwin's Easter hymn names the importance of this invitation. Day of arising, Christ on the roadway, unknown companion walks with his own, when they invite him, as fades the first day, the bread is broken, Christ is made known. And she goes on, when we are walking, doubtful and dreading, blinded by sadness, slowness of heart, Christ walks with us, ever awaiting our invitation. Stay, do not part. People of God, do not underestimate the importance of our invitations to Christ, to each other, to the stranger, wherever they come from. God's divine presence never comes forced upon us. Christ is the waiting one. And we have a choice each day, this day, to ask that this would be revealed also to us, to ask that our eyes might be open to recognize the living presence of the love and compassion and grace that is God. God is love. May we be granted the grace to see this truth in the ordinary nooks and crannies of our everydayness, however ordinary it may seem. If we just begin the day as the choir began us with their opening anthem, this is the day the Lord has made. Be glad, be glad, be glad, be glad. Do you remember them singing that? Be glad, be glad, be glad, be glad, and rejoice in it. Amen.